Our next storyteller is a graduate student, was a graduate student of the University of Illinois, and she works in the Morgridge Institute of Research, and she's going to tell us a story named Adventures with Worms. Please give a big, big round of applause to Tracy Chong, everybody. Tracy Chong.
I live in a 150 square foot studio, not by myself, but with over 5,000 roommates. At night, I don't need a white noise machine to fall asleep because I can hear them rustling and crawling around. But maybe I do need some noise-canceling headphones instead. This is not my first encounter with the sound of creatures rustling around, though. In southern Illinois, there's a very special road in the Shawnee National Forest. Twice a year, a mass migration happens. A mass migration of snakes, reptiles, and amphibians as they cross from the cliffs and bluffs to the swamps as the seasons change. So what was I doing in Snake Road? Yes, this road is actually named Snake Road. And my business in Snake Road was not to study snakes, but to study worms. My first formal encounter with worms was with Freshwater Planarians, the masters of regeneration. Some of you may know them from biology class, where, like in Game of Thrones, beheadings happen rather frequently. But in this case, they are not followed by a bloody death. Instead, they just regrow a new head, all without breaking a sweat. When I was a graduate student, I was helping with a comparative study to find out why some planarians can regenerate better than others. But as it turns out, one of the most difficult parts of this project was to find the elusive worms. We couldn't just order them off the internet. So we had to go on what I called worm hunting adventures to collect them from the wild. Over the course of 2 years, my colleague James and I made multiple trips to Snake Road, one of the rare places in Illinois where we could find these species of worms. Sometimes we went by ourselves, other times we were joined by curious and helpful lab mates. And days turning over thousands of pea-sized rocks in the stream, often seeing many different types of worms before encountering the ones that we were looking for. They were really good at hiding. At best, it was zen-like and calming. I would look at the beautiful cliffs and listen to the gentle sounds of the stream. At worst, it was mind-numbing and frustrating, especially when conditions were extreme. Being bitten by swarms of mosquitoes in the hot, humid summer, to dipping our hands in cold, freezing water for hours during the winter months. At the start of each trip, I would wish so very hard that today would be the lucky day and that the worms would just be hanging out. But of course, this was never the case. Once, amidst the peace and quiet, I heard a faint rumbling sound. James and I locked eyes, and he said with a very straight face, "A wild boar?" Shit, the image of a wild boar coming straight at me flashed before my eyes. I ran through the different scenarios in my head. Should I climb a tree? Wait, could I even do that? Run to where? Fight? Then I heard James laughing, and he confessed that it was his stomach rumbling. Yeah, feeling hungry during those long afternoons was very common. And then there was the fear of poisonous snakes. It is Snake Road after all. There are cottonmouth snakes, also known as water moccasins in southern Illinois. I remember reading how they are poisonous, producing toxins that disrupt blood clotting and destroy tissues and cells. such a scary thought. The scariest part though was when I had to pee. Imagine being this close to the ground that's covered with long grass, branches, and layers of fallen leaves, not knowing what's hiding beneath, but knowing for sure that knowing that there might be a snake in there, maybe even a poisonous one. I remember my routine rather clearly. I would use my feet and a stick to sweep the area before squatting down. Even then, my legs would be shaking, and every faint rustling sound would cause my heart to skip a beat. But when I was done, it was such a relief. In more than one way. Eventually, we collected enough worms and brought them back to the lab to investigate why polarity, which end is which in the animal, is important when it comes to regenerating a missing body part. My next worm adventure brought me to the Bay Area to study a roundworm. It was a great time, exciting science, gorgeous weather. There were mountains to climb and hills to hike. I was on a very tight budget though, and this meant that I rarely ate out. And when I did, it was very special, and I would pack my leftovers for my next meal. One night, after a lovely dinner with my best friend Nick, I headed home, happy and full. At the BART station, a homeless man approached me, asking if I needed my leftovers. At this time, my leftovers were very precious to me. So I said, yes, I need them. The moment these words left my mouth, I felt like the most horrible, selfish person. Here I was, able to go out and have a wonderful meal, able to go home and fall asleep in a warm, cozy bed, and yet I could not give my leftovers to someone who really needed them. At that moment, I made a very simple promise to myself that for as long as I could afford it, and if I had leftovers and met someone that needed them, I would give them away. From that incident though, I had always wanted to do even more to alleviate hunger and food shortage. As it turns out, the potential answer was right in front of me. After years of working with gentle and harmless flatworms and roundworms, I now work in a lab here at the Morgridge Institute that studies parasitic worms. One of these parasites, the tapeworm, spends part of its life developing inside an insect, the beetle. The larval stage of this beetle, which we also keep in lab, is known as the mealworm. Many mornings, I would see my colleague, Edward, tending to his mealworms. And once, we joked about how delicious and yummy these mealworms would be for breakfast. Actually, it was more like I would joke, and Edward, well, he looked really grossed out at the thought of eating his mealworms. I had always known that people ate insects as food, but at the same time, I started hearing more and more about insects as a potential source of protein. The more I read, the more convinced I was that eating insects could be a sustainable solution to addressing the problem of food and nutrition shortage, especially as our population increases, both in the US and in the rest of the world. So of course, I had to test this idea out for myself. The first insect that I ate was bondegi. Bondegi is silkworm larvae, a South Korean street food that is often found boiled and served in paper cups. We found our bondegi sold at a Korean grocery store in a can. I tried the bondegi with my Korean friend, and it was so bad. I had tears streaming down my face, trying not to gag. I couldn't decide if it was better to swallow it and be done with it, or to spit it out, because the boiled silkworm larvae was mushy and tasted like wet wood. I then had a brilliant idea that maybe roasting it would make it taste better. But this was a terrible, horrible mistake, as roasting the bondegi caused the whole place to smell like rotting wet wood. But fortunately, my friends were understanding. At this point, I was very, very worried. How would my idea of using insects as a sustainable food source work if I hated the taste of insects? Fortunately, the next bugs I tried were the mealworms. I can still remember how relieved I felt when I took my first bite of a roasted mealworm. It was delicious. It was crunchy, it had a mild nutty flavor. I could eat tons of this. So yeah, as it turns out, mealworms have great potential as a food source because they have high protein content and they are easy to grow. And yes, my 5,000 roommates who keep me company at night are my mealworms. But rest assured, these mealworms come from a happy farm and they have not been in contact with the parasites in lab. So now I do what I love, worms and cooking. And feeding my friends and co-workers who thankfully are open to being food testers. Even Edward has been convinced to eat a mealworm. Of all my adventures and challenges with worms, I have a feeling that the best, but maybe most difficult challenge is yet to come. I have to convince each and every one of you that mealworms are delicious and nutritious.